Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Point, the latest addition to the Vendetta Sports Podcast Network. My name is Jarrod Prosser and I'm very happy to have you on board with us today. In every edition of The Point, I'll take you through a specific question or query or issue that currently impacts the NBA. Today, for our first episode, we're going to take a look at what ails the Toronto Raptors. As we record this, the Raptors are sporting a 21-27 win-loss record. That is somewhat worse than what Coach Nick Nurse and General Manager Masai Ujiri would have expected from this group. Let's start by examining what the Raptors are not doing well, the reasons that they currently sit well below 500. To put it simply, the Raptors struggle to put the ball in the hoop, and they struggle to stop their opponents doing the same. Toronto ranked dead last in effective field goal percentage and second to last in opponents' effective field goal percentage. Pretty simple, right? The Raptors' defense, of course, isn't necessarily designed to make their opposition miss a bunch of shots. Rather, their pesky, switchy defense is built around forcing a ton of turnovers and getting out into the open floor. To that end, the Raptors do lead the league in opponent turnover percentage. The Raptors try to mitigate what is a pretty poor half-court offense by creating turnovers, getting out and running, crashing the glass, getting to the free throw line. They do these things reasonably well, although much of that can be attributed to Pascal Siakam, who is quietly having another All-NBA caliber season. But they don't do these things nearly enough or nearly well enough to cover for their sins of their half-court attack. So let's examine why Toronto struggled to score in the half-court. It's easy to point to poor individual campaigns here. Fred VanVleet is having his worst shooting season since becoming a full-time starter. Siakam is down to 32% from three. Gary Trent Jr. started the season in a horrible slump, though in fairness, his last few weeks have been much, much better. Chris Boucher, an important rotation piece for the Raptors, he is clearly not the shooter or, frankly, the player that the Raptors had hoped he would be. Scotty Barnes is struggling to find an identity within this offense. A little aside here, for all of those that are saying that he's a disappointment or, God forbid, a bust, settle down. Barnes is 21 years old. He's a second-year pro. He's not going to be Kawhi Leonard. Let's get that clear. But he's still going to be very, very good, and that's perfectly fine. But I digress. Whilst internal improvement may well be coming from the Raptors' core lineup, there are some structural issues within their offense. Their lack of a genuine playmaking point guard means that they're not great at creating advantages within the half court. Their personnel in general are pretty poor at converting whatever advantages they do create. For all of his doggedness, his clutch shot making, and the whole rags to riches narrative, Fred VanVleet is a shooter. He is not a playmaking point guard. Siakam, Anunoby, Trent, they're not great ball movers. Barnes will be, but as I mentioned, he's a long way from a finished product with the ball in hand. That lack of playmaking leads to a raft of isolation possessions for Toronto. The Raptors are 8th in isolation frequency in the NBA, yet dead last in effectiveness within isolation possessions. Why? The Raptors don't have a true offensive alpha, a player that can make something out of nothing. Siakam's a fine second option, an excellent second option, a Jaylen Brown or an Anthony Davis type of role, or going back to my generation of Scottie Pippen. That sort of role suits him perfectly. As a number one offensive option on an elite team, he's not quite there. Behind Siakam sit a bunch of really good third options in VanVleet, Anunoby, and Trent. Scotty Barnes, for all of his ability and all of his talent, doesn't project as a genuine first option either. When you're presented with a lineup profile like that, you need your system to be able to break open defenses, to create the cracks that can be exploited. The Jazz of Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell were masters at this. Quinn Snyder's system consistently had defenders spinning like tops. You would either get an open dunk or an open three or an open driving lane. It was a wonderful offense to watch. Toronto just don't have that. The Jazz also had Mitchell, who is a far better offensive option than anybody in Raptor Red right now. The Raptors don't have a Luka, a Joel Embiid, or a Jason Tatum to create a reasonable shot when the offense breaks down and the shot clock is looming large. What they have is a series of players who love to take the air out of the ball, survey the floor, then attack, rather than keeping the defense moving. Barnes's lack of a jump shot creates a whole raft of other issues, though Nurse has mitigated those somewhat by playing Barnes as a nominal offensive centre of late. The lack of ball movement that Toronto has, that allows defences to reset themselves, to get help defenders into the right positions, to enable scram switches if required, those sorts of things. That means poor isolation players are forced into isolation situations, which, as you might expect, leads to poor offense. As much as Toronto's half-court offense is a little bit messy, Toronto does hang its hat on its defense. Unfortunately, that's not completely up to scratch either. The team currently ranking 20th in defensive efficiency. Why? In short, the Raptors' over-aggressiveness, which is their calling card, they want to create all these turnovers, as I mentioned, it's killing them right now. Whether it's an X out, a switch to blitz, a peel switches, no team has leaned into all these aggressive type of defenses in the way that the Raptors have. And when it works, it's great. It makes the offense have to enact a series of quick-hitting passes, fast, snappy decisions to stay ahead if you're blitzing. More often than not, that results in a turnover or a rushed shot or a broken offense. When it doesn't work, it results in wide-open jump shots or cavernous lanes to the hoop. This style of defense requires two prerequisites: switchable and capable defenders, which the Raptors have, and boundless energy, which the Raptors do not have. Toronto is a startlingly thin team, with Precious Achiuwa missing so much time at the start of the season, Otto Porter barely playing and is now done for the year, as well as some poorly timed injuries to Siakam and Trent. Nick Nurse has had to lean on his core to an almost unreasonable level. With Anunoby and Van Vliet averaging almost 37 minutes a game, Siakam almost 38, when you play the type of defense that the Raptors do, that's just not sustainable. The amount of energy required to sprint and recover around the perimeter in Nurse's scheme is almost unholy, and it's no surprise to see practically every core Raptor, bar Anunoby, get consistently blown by every game. These poor guys must be exhausted. That legginess, in turn, is likely contributing to the poor jump shooting that permeates across the team, which, in turn, leads to live ball possessions for the opposition. Transition defense. It's all cyclical. Fix one, you might be able to fix the other. How do you do that, though? If Nurse chooses to play a more conservative defensive system, he's likely to get exposed without a legitimate rim protector. Rookie Christian Coloco did okay in limited minutes earlier in the season, but he's as green as the grass at your local golf club and is a zero on offense. The continued reintegration of Achiuwa after his injury could prove interesting. Whilst he's not a traditional centre by any means, he does provide some shot blocking, per 36 minutes, 1.3 blocks this season, and he has enough agility and speed to hang on the perimeter. Offensively, he is not a playmaker in any way. He won't fix that problem, but he has flashed a good enough outside jumper to be able to keep opposition bigs honest. I'd be interested to see if Nurse reins it in a little bit on defense with Achiuwa on the floor for the remainder of the regular season at least, and lets Achiuwa sit back and block some shots and lets the rest of his team rest a little bit on defense. I want to focus on Scotty Barnes for just a moment here as well. Barnes is in an interesting spot. Despite being the 4th overall pick in 2021, he's come into an established team. Unlike draft mates Cade Cunningham, Josh Giddey, or Franz Wagner, he's not going to see the ball as a first or a second option. That, of course, means playing off the ball where his poor jump shooting comes under the microscope. He is, though, a willing and able facilitator. We've seen Nurse move Barnes into that centre's role on offense, which keeps him a little bit closer to the basket. But I think that Toronto could start to give him more playmaking responsibilities as well, in a similar vein to how the Warriors, I guess, enabled Draymond Green a few years back, where he would screen for an established ball carrier, generally Steph Curry in the Warriors' case, and he would be able to catch the ball downhill in 4-on-3 situations and use his passing ability to pick open defenses. That could unblock more of Barnes' playmaking potential, which is something that, as established, the Raptors desperately need. Will it work? It's tough to say. Barnes' handle is still pretty loose and needs to improve when he's under pressure. Toronto are also one of the NBA's least frequent users of the pick and roll, so they'd need a change in their core offensive philosophy. And the Siakam-Van Vliet combination, the two most prominent ball handlers for the Raptors, they're both excellent ballers in their own right, but nobody can replicate Steph Curry's gravity. Still, I'd like to see Toronto at least give it a try to see if they can find another level in Barnes' offensive capabilities. Defensively, Barnes has been a little bit disappointing in his second season for mine. Whilst his off-ball defense has been excellent and his ability to call out plays in the backline is very encouraging for such a young basketballer, his defense at the point of attack has been pretty poor. Whilst his length can prove troublesome for smaller, quicker guards, he's far too often getting blown by this season. Barnes doesn't possess the greatest foot speed, but I think that his stance is a little too rigid, a little too high at the moment. Now, usually that's a fixable error, so it's not likely a long-term concern. At the moment, though, Barnes is essentially a very, very high-end Robert Covington at the defensive end. That's not bad, by the way, but it's not what the Raptors expected either. Again, Barnes is young. He's going to be fine in the long run. But in the here and now, for a team that was expecting to compete, finding a way to unlock more of Barnes' game at both ends of the floor is imperative to Toronto's success. Now, whilst Toronto's record looks poor now, a 7-game Western road trip that begins tonight with a match against the resurgent Sacramento Kings could have them in even more trouble before the trade deadline. Does a team that is potentially 10 games or more below 500 look to add players? It's pretty unlikely. Rather, if the Raptors are to make moves at all, it will be to sell. Van Vliet and Anunoby both have player options for next season. Both are 100% going to decline those. Do the Raptors want to pay a soon-to-be 30-year-old small guard in Van Vliet if they don't think that they're in true championship contention? Anunoby may win Defensive Player of the Year this season. He's elite at that end. But what is the right price for a defensive phenom who might never average 20 points a game? Masai Ujiri wants to compete, and tearing down this roster would be hard for him to stomach. That said, he doesn't want the Raptors to be mediocre in the long term either. I expect the front office to give this core a chance to play out the season to see if they can right themselves, get themselves back on track. If they can't, then expect changes. Toronto are somewhat of a stylistic outlier in an increasingly homogenous NBA landscape. The success or failure of these Raptors is something that the league is watching very closely. We talk about positionless basketball. The Raptors are trying to make that happen right now, live, on the court. Should they provide a positive proof of concept, we might just be seeing the beginnings of the next structural change in the NBA. Now, that's going to do it for the first edition of The Point. Please leave your thoughts and any questions that you might have below the line, and I'll do my best to respond to those. I hope that you've enjoyed what I've covered here today, and I'll see you again for our next video. In the meantime, please don't forget to like and subscribe to The Point and to all of the other wonderful content that Vendetta Sports Media provides. My name is Jarrod Prosser. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.